Innovation and creativity are central to entrepreneurship. But what happens when you go beyond the edge? The Frontier Entrepreneurship Podcast brings you the world's first, the disruptive, the avant-garde. We take you to the frontier in conversation with the entrepreneurs who are the forerunners of the industries of the future. Get to know their world with co-hosts Braden, Kemp, and Tracy Morningstar. The power grid. The vast network of generation, transmission, and delivery that ensures on-demand electricity for the modern world. As this monumental infrastructure ages, it must endure everything that nature and humanity throws at it, from encroaching vegetation to extreme weather events to the ambitious requirements of large-scale electrification. So what does the future hold? Look up. You might just see an autonomous on-wire robot beginning to carry out this work, scoping thousands of kilometers of transmission lines enhanced by artificial intelligence and predictive analytics. Today, we take you to the frontier of grid transformation with James Aein, co-founder and CEO of ENERZA.
I'm Braden Kemp here with my co-host Tracy Morningstar, and today we're taking you to the frontier with James Aein, co-founder and CEO of ENERZA. James, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Brandon. Hey, Tracy. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
James, we're always excited to talk to people who start companies in big industries that touch everyone, and in this case, electricity and the grid. Can you give us a bit of a rundown on what your company does and how it came to be?
Absolutely. So ENERZA provides a platform to utilities to predict outages and wildfires. And it's quite unique. The way we do this, we actually have these robots that go on lines. These are power lines, distribution, transmission, and they capture really key data sets. So when you look at what's happening with the market, EV vehicles, or electrification of the market, you need to have a more reliable supply of electricity. And that's where we come in to provide that insight to the utilities.
That's really neat. Can you give me like a tactical example of the sort of risk that you can detect or the data you're capturing for those utilities?
Absolutely. I'll give you a bit more context in terms of the way it's been done right now. So utilities have to inspect the power lines each year. They're mandated to do that. Now, they send people out there to manually inspect the wires, and that is for distribution lines. These are what you see in the cities in terms of, power poles. So they either drive around or they walk around, and the data they capture is subjective. A guy says, hey, look, the pole is not leaning, or it's leaning, or it needs attention. That causes a lot of issues when it comes to outages, from vegetation growth to asset defect. For example, what happened in Maui allegedly was from a defect in the wire. With vegetation encroachment, you have a bit of a spark, or the line is corroded and snaps. You have dry environment, perfect package for a wildfire. We know this. Why? Because, for example, one of the utilities in California has been, charged with the malpractice of improper asset inspection.
Really interesting. I wasn't sure. I wasn't aware that was even like a risk that business would have in terms of malpractice. That's interesting to hear.
No, it is. It is. And quite frankly, for example, for the past 5 years, 8 of the wildfires in California were caused by utility wrongdoings. And it has killed people. It's one of those problems, especially with wildfires. You can't really put a price on it. People lose their homes, people get misplaced, people lose their lives. And a lot of the times, this is something that could be prevented, honestly.
Wow.
James, I'm in Northern Ontario, and I believe I read that your technology is still dependent on 5G. Obviously, we don't have 5G up here. We maybe have 3. But I was just wondering, is it still going to be able to have that effect in Northern Ontario?
Absolutely. Great question. We are deploying this technology in places that don't even have 3G. So what we have implemented is a wireless dumping zones where the robot gets close to these areas that can actually dump the data over to these modules or IoT devices, where then manually they can extract the data. For sure, it can navigate through those areas. We do have GPS modules and other sensors that can coordinate, where it's located, where's the next position is going to go.
On the location topic, I see you run a bit of a whirlwind tour in September. California, Australia. What is the international response like? And are those problems or risks the same across different countries and continents, or is there more distinct risks and problems that you're seeing?
No, it's been crazy. When we started this journey, we were focusing Canadian market. Then we started noticing people reaching out from Central America, from US, and then we had talks with European companies. The problem is global in a sense that the assets or the blueprints are the same. A transformer is a transformer, a power line is a power line, regardless the position it's in. And the way people are doing inspection is very consistent among utilities. It's one of those industries that once they have a practice, they kind of follow that. So once you get new technologies, they kind of follow. It has that domino effect. And that's what's kind of unique about what we do. And that's where we get a lot of traction, right? I just spoke to someone from Estonia, for example, they reached out, right? These are all organic incoming leads, which is good, especially at this stage.
It's interesting you say that, because I wanted to ask you about that. It's one of the things that strikes me as like an activity that doesn't scale. So someone from Hydro One came down my street, and I kind of live in the middle of nowhere. I don't know, they came down, say, 3 months ago, individually marking trees that are either in the way or maybe next year going to be in the way. And it struck me as like an almost impossible task when you consider the amount of above ground power lines that are in Ontario.
Well, absolutely. And there's about 10 million kilometers of distribution lines, just to give you a context, right? In US, and in Canada, it's about 6 million distribution lines. And they do it manually. As you mentioned, a lot of times they just go mark them, hey, this tree might cause vegetation encroachment dangers to the line. And it's quite expensive. I know, for example, one of the utilities in Ontario, they have about 168 truck drivers that the role they have is just to go around the city and look at the trees. And they get paid quite well too, right? It's a good job to have.
Yeah, when you're collaborating with these other countries, what are you looking for? Are you looking for industry experts, resources? Are you building a community even?
Utilities are known to be not the best customers, in a sense that they're difficult to sell to, they're difficult to have new technologies, but there are some key players that are trying to have some novel technologies incorporated. So we are working with some of these utilities to do demonstrations, to do case studies, to do pilot projects with them. And what's unique about the pool of the customers that we have is, for example, in North America, all the assets are governed by the same regulations. So when we go out the pilot, it will be applicable to every single utility in North America. This is also true for European market. We have 2 case studies from those partners, then we can operate anywhere in Europe, in a sense.
Interesting on the business model, and a big market or a non-traditional market, or as you say, one that's maybe hard to sell to. The reason why is I co-founded a company that developed, manufactured, sold, and shipped product all from one warehouse, direct to the consumer or through retail outlets. Nothing complicated. You take the customer's money, you box up the order, you send the order to the customer. So that kind of a sales cycle is like, it's really easy to understand, and it's straightforward. What does selling to a utility look like?
It's pretty lengthy. We're looking at 6 months up to a year and a half. It depends how big the utility is. The bigger it is, the longer the process is. It's just a different hierarchy of decision making you have to go through. The smaller ones are fairly quick. You're looking at 3 to 5 months, give or take. And the way we go to the market will be an inspection as a service or robotic as a service, where we go out there and do the job that people are doing. A lot of these utilities, the contract is work out to contractors. So instead of giving them qualitative data, we give them quantitative data in a sense. But the process is lengthy, and it's a little bit different when you look at some of the privately owned utilities in the US, because in Canada, about 90% are publicly owned. So it's a little bit different selling cycles in the sense that in Canada, you have to go through a competitive bid once you pass a threshold. In the US, it's a little bit different for some utilities.
How big is a small utility? How many customers do they have?
Typically, you look at how many miles or kilometers of distribution they serve. It could be as little as 500 miles or 1,000 kilometers. Big ones, for example, BC Hydro has about 250,000 kilometers of distribution line. So that's considered medium size. And then you look at Hydro-Quebec. which is the largest and the biggest utility in North America in terms of its spendings, kilometers, innovation, profit, and so forth.
Interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that.
When you were thinking of, I had noticed that you had did your thesis on BC Hydro. What kind of impact has that your thesis contributed to this journey that you're on right now?
That is a great question. Honestly, I wasn't even planning on getting into this market or industry. We kind of fell into it by accident. During last year, I was working on an IoT device for manufacturing plants. And during one of my conversations, one of the customers, he used to work at BC Hydro. And he kind of mentioned, hey, look, James, this problem is a lot bigger than what you're working on. Maybe you should investigate this. And I reached out to the contacts that I used to know at BC Hydro. Now, what I did there for my thesis was high voltage stability and feasibility studies. So high voltage is anything to do with coming from generation to transmission before the substations. But I was working on reliability, and I kind of almost forgot about this till 6 months ago. I was moving out of my place in Toronto, and I came across the thesis that I wrote. And I looked at it, and like it's surprisingly that I actually wrote the thesis exactly what I'm actually working on right now. But what I noticed during my time at BC Hydro, a lot of the processes, a lot of the platforms they use is quite outdated. This is that they use softwares or platforms for planning. The software has been in place since early 2000, right? And they haven't really made any sort of changes to it. It's one of those industries that is really in need of new technologies, I would say.
I'm going to change gears a little bit on you. You just finished the Berkeley Skydeck Accelerator program, right?
We did, yes.
I saw your cohort had something like 23 or 24 companies accepted from 1,800 applicants.
Yes. So they have about 1 or 2% acceptance rate.
What does that feel like? Is it validation? Like, hey, we're really onto something here.
It is. And it's quite unique because there were only 2 Canadian companies, and both of us, we were both from energy sector. So it was good to see, the 2 energy companies are both from Canada. They bring a lot of brilliant companies out there. A lot of them are solving real world problems. I met people that are trying to solve stroke patients before that happens, in terms of medical devices. A lot of other biotech industries as well. We have seen a lot of traction from day one, in the sense that this is a really big problem. We're going to have a lot of outages. We're going to have a lot of wildfires, and we need a different way to solve it. And we were lucky to be part of this cohort and part of that program. It opens up a new doors for us, in the sense that, from investors to partners and so forth.
Yeah, and that's what I was, I think, getting at. Like, what is a program like that? What do you take away from it? Is it the advisory, or is it the networking and connections? I think they have some monetary involvement as well, right, in the cohort companies?
They do, yes. They do investment, and they take equity in return. What's unique about them is like Y CEO, Y Combinator, but the difference is you have an office space that you share with other cohort members. They have a big network of alumni from this program that you can always reach out to if you need any sort of contacts. And being right in the Bay Area, they have a lot of events that they pair you up with either advisors, either the experts in this domain you're working on, or they have these investors startup cohort meetings, or at the demo day where we did, pitch in front of hundreds of people. It brings a lot of attention in terms of what you do, if they can help, if they can invest, if they get you connected to others. So it's a very unique incubator. We've been part of different ones here, but this was quite unique in terms of the way they approach it, and very hands-on.
Yeah, very cool. There's a lot of really good ones out there, and that's one that I have come across, but never have spoken with anyone who's been part of.
No, it's great. It's great. It's great, and I think I always recommend it to anyone else who wants to join and get a different perspectives of accelerators or incubators.
With the Hurricane Lee that came through, did you have any impact on ensuring that the lines were secure?
Not yet. So we've been at this for about a year. Actually, September 29th is our anniversary. We are doing some demonstrations. We've done some in Canada. We're doing one down in South America in 2 weeks. But we haven't really deployed these technologies at full scale. We're just at a demonstration stage right now. But in future, We do incorporate weather data and the storm data and the impact they have on the outages. So in future, perhaps you can put that in as well.
That's an interesting one. Is line damage something that you can detect in real time, or are you trying to detect in real time?
So we look at things like corrosion on the wire. So corrosion is something that happens within the line, for example. So with naked eyes, with drone satellites, you can't really see them. You need to have special sensors to get up there and look at it. So power line technicians do that. They close the street, they have bucket trucks, they go up there and inspect it. When it comes to splices or other defects on the wire, only humans can capture it right now, or robots. What we do, we capture this data, we capture historical data, and we capture vegetation data. So we combine all these data with third-party data. These are weather data. And we say, hey, look, from the past, you had a wind gust of 30 knots or 30 kilometers per hour that was able to snap this wooden pole with this level of hollowness or defect in the wire. So we correlate that data through the AI, and we can predict where exactly in your grid you're going to have outages. So we show a heat map in a sense that, hey, look, at this place in 2 weeks, you're going to have an outage. You better do either manage the trees or trim the trees, prune the trees, or harden the infrastructure. That's them changing the conductors, the wires, or changing the whole wooden pole, for example.
That's incredible. I mean, you're in the business. You see these AI-enabled companies popping up left, right, and center, but that's like a really tangible example of an AI enablement that has a clear benefit. And imagine, is that system going to get smarter the more data and the more time on the wire your robots have?
Absolutely. So the longer we stay on the lines, the more data we capture, not only the more we can train the model, the better the predictive model gets. Some of these utilities in the US that have this data sharing program where they're actually sharing all the asset information. But that helps us quite a bit to understand what happened, for example, out in the West, let's say in California and San Francisco, that what were the learnings from that failure? And we apply the same learnings to something that's going on in Detroit, for example, right? So it will be very crucial for us to get all these sort of different data sets. The work has been done on the what's called grid edge technologies. This is what the data we capture from smart meters, from SCADAs, that people are putting analytics to understand what's the demand supply, what is, other key information for utilities. But the focus is not shifting towards up the stream. It can the infrastructure support it, and that's where we come in to provide that analytics.
What kind of time frame are we looking at before your technology is starting to have an impact on the lines?
So we already have deployed some demonstrations where we're getting key value from them, but the actual demonstration of pilot project in mass scale, it starts June of next year.
Back to basics a little bit. We hear and we say the power grid. Everyone kind of nods their head and accepts it as a thing that is, but I bet most of us don't really understand what's going on. Like, what is the grid and what kind of infrastructure is involved?
Great question. So power comes from different means of generation, right? You can have nuclear plants, you can have dams, you can have the thermal power plants, you can have different sources of energy, which they convert the energy in different means and gets it to electricity. Then it goes to big towers. Those are the transmission lines. These are what you see outside the cities. The big towers they usually mount them in helicopters, and they come through what's called a substation, where they go from, let's say, 500,000 volts down to 20,000, 30,000, and it goes to distribution level. That's what you see in the city. And then from there on the pole, they have these transformers that, you step it down, further down, it goes to 110 volts, comes to your house. But during this process, and this is something I learned myself, from generation to your house, about 60% of the power is lost, right? That's quite a bit. And when you look at distribution system, and that's what we bring with our analytics, and the distribution system, that's when you see in the city, up to 10% could be lost due to corrosion on the wire. So when you have defects on the wire or the conductor of the wire is old, the resistance goes up. And when that happens, you have more losses due to the heat. So if we can proactively find the location of these conductors, flag it on the system, and they can retrofit all these conductors, they can increase the capacity of the grid, so the losses would decrease. And that's what we try to bring to the market. What's happening around the world right now is there's not enough supply based off the demands that we have. Every year in parts of US, they have to have scheduled outages because of the demand for AC electricity is so high in the summertime. I mean, Los Angeles is a great example every year.
Yeah. And I mean, the federal government here in Canada is targeting, I believe 2035, 100% of vehicles sold to be EVs. I imagine there's a huge draw that we're maybe not ready for.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a big demand on that. Also, on the industries themselves, they're electrifying a lot of the processes. So there's a lot of need for reliability of this system. And there's a whole new trend on the energy sector called decentralized grid, where you can actually have solar panels in your house and you can't sell that extra power to your neighbor. So that requires new set of challenges that needs to be solved from, can the grid support it? Can you have omnidirectional power going to your system? What would you do with the extra power? So there's a lot going on, and utilities are rambling to find a solution that can work.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It's complex, I guess.
Honestly, very complex. Even for me, every day I'm learning new things, and everything is, everything's complex, complicated. And when you look at what's happening in the world and the need for such technologies, you kind of want to see that governments are stepping in. I feel like there's a lot of attention going in towards EV charging stations, but no one's talking about, all right, that's okay, but can the infrastructure support it? I think that narrative has to be changed.
Yeah. Yep. That's an interesting comment. And I think I've had the thought, but I don't know anything about the industry. And so it's interesting to hear you say that.
You had mentioned that your father always inspired you to start something on your own. Obviously, our parents' journey and our own journey generations later is much different. You had also mentioned starting up of the business was kind of like an extreme thing that you did. When you're saying that it was extreme starting up a startup, what made you decide to eventually take that leap?
Great question. So I always wanted to have something of my own. In the past, I've tried different startups, which for different reasons didn't work out. And my father, being an engineer, he always, wanted me to start up something of my own as well. I mean, I'm an immigrant. He came here when we were 10 years old. And since, I was little, he used to always tell me, hey, look, like, it's good, you're going to get degrees and so forth, but always try to do something impactful. Now, when I was before startups, I was, managing sales teams, I was selling engineering products. But when you want to start something, you want to make some sacrifices. You got to leave the lifestyle you have behind, and you need to commit more than 9 to 5. It's not a 9 to 5 job, right? Last night I hopped on a call at 8 o'clock. It's not something you can just say, hey, you know what? I'm going to clock out at 5. And being a startup entrepreneur is very rewarding, I would say. It's extremely rewarding. It has its challenges, especially if it's later in the life where you have, wives and kids. So it's a little bit different, but it's extremely rewarding, I would say.
That's something kind of a common theme that we hear when we talk to entrepreneurs, is that around that decision point of leaving a stable, secure job and jumping into a startup it's a frightening thing, and we need people to take that risk, because otherwise, where does the innovation come from?
Yeah, it's pretty frightening, I would say, especially like at first, you don't know if it's going to take off, if, the time you're spending on this, it's going to be fruitful. Even at different stages, you always question not only yourself, but like the mind, the problem space, right? Because when you try to do something novel that hasn't been done before, you start hearing two different sides of story. People that either love it or people say they're very skeptical, right? And the key is you have to always push forward. You have to always believe in yourself and your team. And that's what makes it rewarding.
Yep. And you're in a space where you're trying to change the status quo in a big and relatively slow moving industry.
Yes. And that poses different dangers and challenges. But what we've noticed is, despite all of that, there's a lot of interest from utilities. There's a lot of willingness and devotion of time from their end in terms of in-kind resources to kind of like initiate the conversation. They chat with us every week, give us feedback on terms of, hey, look, this is cool what you're doing with the software. What if you add this? This means a lot for us, right? So we're seeing a lot of interest and also a lot of leaning towards wanting to try something like this. which is nice being in this.
Yeah. I've got one more question for you, and is the thing that I've heard a number of times. Now, I don't know who to credit it to, but it goes something like, if Thomas Edison were alive today, he'd recognize our electric industry because we really haven't innovated a whole lot since the 1930s. Is that a real thing, or is that just something people like to say?
That is real. I actually have on my pitch deck, when I pitch to investors, I have an image of 2 power line technicians inspecting the wire. One is from 1930s and one is for 2023. And the only difference between those 2 pictures is one is wearing a hard hat. That's the only difference. Nothing has really changed in terms of the way we do power line inspection. When it comes especially to distribution, on transmission lines, the big towers, they have use satellites, use drones, but in the city, they still send people up there to inspect the wires. Nothing has really changed. And the way we distribute energy, transmit energy has been the same since 1880s, when the first power plant came online in New York.
Very cool. Always wanted to ask someone who actually knew the answer to that question.
I did end up listening to the podcast that you had suggested, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. And it is very inspirational. We do have quite a bit of the people that come on to the show, and they talk about what motivates them, how we change our mindset. And I just want for you just to talk a little bit about that and how you're evolving this new product.
Absolutely. So Joe Dispenza wrote quite a few different books. One is one that I just mentioned, how you can change your mindset. And it does have a big impact in terms of not only your personal goals and career choices as well. Your thoughts really drive your ambitions and drive your behavior. And the way you approach that would determine what your future would be like, in a sense that how you would approach your thoughts and behavior. And being in an entrepreneurship world, and everyone knows this, you have your ups and downs. It's not like a exponential happiness every day. You go through roller coaster of emotions, and it's about being resilient. And I say being resilient, I might put a bit of pun in this, resilient grid and resiliency of the entrepreneurs, but that's what sets you apart than, not doing this at all. So I think I read that book twice. There are some, other great books and webinars that he does, but I think changing your mindset would have a different impact on whatever your goal is in life. It doesn't have to be entrepreneurship. It can be an athlete. It can be, you want to do a marathon.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Tracy, I think that's a great and sort of insightful question and answer to end on. What do you think?
I agree.
Fantastic. James, thanks so much for joining us today. I've learned a whole lot about something that we all just sort of accept as being a truth, but we don't really understand.
Thank you so much, guys, for having me. It was a pleasure talking to everyone.
We'll be right back after this short break.
NCFDC is located at the Venture 13 Innovation Centre in Cobourg, Ontario, just over an hour east of Toronto. E13 offers a soft landing opportunity for tech startups, flexible co-working space, and event venue. Head to venture13.ca to learn more. That's venture13.ca.
We return to the Frontier Entrepreneurship Podcast with co-hosts Braden Kemp and Tracy Morningstar.
Tracy, I've always wanted to ask someone who really understands power transmission and grids that question about an engineer from the 1930s being able to understand our systems today. And it sounds like maybe that isn't just something people say. And in the system of power transmission in cities really hasn't changed in 100 years. And here we are talking to this person who started a company to solve modern day problems on 100-year-old technology. That's pretty cool.
It is very cool. And the thing of it also is that he wrote a thesis several years back, tried his hand at entrepreneurship, and realized, taking a look back at that thesis, darn, it applies. And after building those connections and building those relationships, he was able to put the plan into place. And now here we are, putting together a plan for not only North America, but other countries. And that's amazing to me.
Yeah, a really bright guy. And I think a company a company that has absolutely massive potential in the marketplace.
Absolutely. And he seems to be level-headed. He's definitely has that connection. He has the supports through his father being in almost the same type of job. And yeah, moving that forward.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. Thank you, Tracy. And again to James for joining us. Catch us next time on the Frontier Entrepreneurship Podcast.
This edition of the Frontier Entrepreneurship Podcast was made possible with the support of FedDev Ontario and the Government of Canada. Special thanks to Victoria Pichler. The executive producer of Frontier Entrepreneurship is Robert Washburn. I'm John Hayden. To find out more, head to our website, ncfdc.ca. That's ncfdc.ca. Thanks for listening.